abolished, a Jim Crow system of racial segregation overtook the South. Enforced by the Democratic Party and its Ku Klux Klan terror wing, white landowners updated the realities of slavery to again keep blacks and whites apart. The roots of racism since 1865 has been the treatment of legally freed African Americans as something less than human, guaranteeing all whites a sense of superiority and an economic leg up. When the populist and socialist movements that campaigned most powerfully from the 1880s to the 1920s worked to overcome this separation, they were hammered by the court and electoral systems through a series of stolen elections and twisted race-based legal decisions, and the fusion of the Democratic and Republican parties in the 1917 municipal races in the Northeast. Confirmed by the Supreme Court in the 1890s, this updated Jim Crow caste system again guaranteed that blacks in the South and parts of the North would not be allowed to vote, and that they would be carefully divided from whites by caste as well as class. Since 1970, the primary weapon for suppressing the minority vote has been the third Jim Crow, the drug war. In the tradition of Bacon's Rebellion and the populist socialist upheavals, blacks and whites once again began to unite during the civil rights and anti-war movements of the 1950s and 60s. In response, Richard Nixon's Republican Party invoked the divide and conquer war on drugs. Confronted with the liberalization of the Southern Democratic Party, Nixon feared that black votes might remake America's political map. In Republican eyes, there was only one solution: disenfranchise the African American population, along with young and Latino voters who were leaning strongly to the left. In 1972, Nixon pointedly ignored a powerful report from his own Blue Ribbon Schaefer Commission on drug use and escalated the attack on marijuana and other drugs. In the 45 years since, a staggering 41 million Americans have been arrested for pot or other controlled substances. That's a number of human beings that exceeds the populations of more than 150 other countries worldwide. It has left the United States with the largest prison population in the history of the modern world, while having little or no impact on the actual use of drugs. As Michelle Alexander has shown in her landmark book, The New Jim Crow, the majority of those incarcerated have been black and Latino, with a devastating impact on our elections. Millions of these mostly young, mostly male citizens have been stripped of their right to vote, as well as their ability to maintain families, obtain work, and meaningfully participate in the political lives of their communities. All this has been by design. Once again, a new Jim Crow policy has been delegated by a ruling elite to strip our non-white population of its ability to exercise its fair share of power in our electoral process and to unite with whites in political action. In the 1890s, rising industrial interests committed the nation to a fourth Jim Crow, a course of race-based global empire. The U.S. already had a history of foreign intervention, dating to Thomas Jefferson's 1803 use of our fledgling Navy to fight pirates along the coast, the shores of Tripoli, of what's now called Libya. That was followed by the conquest of the North American continent with genocidal warfare used against the indigenous peoples who had lived here for 20,000 years. By the 1890s, when the frontier consumed, America's giant corporations began to expand overseas. They started with Hawaii, a constitutional monarchy, and then pushed into Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and beyond. And in all cases, these interventions involved the white-ruled U.S. interfering with the political systems of non-white countries. In discussing this fourth Jim Crow, we include an extensive, though not complete, list of these interventions. It underscores the reality that our own political system has become an imperial juggernaut, with the inevitable blowback bound to obliterate any residual pretense to real democracy at home. Generally, there's been an attempt to portray these interventions as benign, meant to bring democracy, progress, and the Christian faith to third world nations. In fact, they've been largely economic in purpose, a dollar democracy to grab other people's resources. The Strip and Flip selection of 2016 by Bob Tracus and Harvey Wallach.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And boy, what a program we have today. Happy Tuesday. Republicans are already scrambling in various states to make it harder to vote, I mean, literally, in one state, they're talking about requiring, if you want to have a mail-in ballot, you have to go to your bank and have it notarized. Right? I mean, we'll get to that. Republicans are continuing to lie about COVID deaths in red states. This is bizarre. We'll get to that. Medea Benjamin is going to be with us about the war in Yemen and what Biden could do and probably, well, hopefully will do. We'll see. We'll have a conversation with Medea Benjamin. She has written a brilliant book about Saudi Arabia, and they are basically the the who is stirring the pot there, running the war, basically. Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding is going to be with us with the latest on COVID. He's the guy who back in January, on January 20th of last year, a year ago, right, a year and 6 days ago, he's the guy who posted a long Twitter thread saying this thing is going to become a pandemic, this thing is going to be here in the United States, this thing is going to kill hundreds of thousands of Americans, we better take it seriously. And the Trump administration laughed at him. He's going to be with us. And Lori Wallach is going to be with us. The first good step on the Buy American, this piece that I published on Sunday, Joe Biden was talking about yesterday. We'll be talking about trade policy. So a lot going on on our program today. Medea will be in our second hour. Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding will be in our third hour, as will Lori Wallach, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, they're both in the third hour. But I want to start out with the filibuster. I think this is really important. I just published a piece on this over at thomhartmann.medium.com, and basically laying out the history with hot links to all the any kind of documentation you may need. The filibuster was not here. The filibuster basically is this: there are 100 senators. If one senator says, "I object to continuing with, to moving forward with any kind of discussion about any particular piece of legislation," once the debate is stopped, the legislation is dead, right? So any one senator can say, "I object," and essentially launch a filibuster. They don't have, this is not Jimmy Smith, Mr. Smith goes to Washington with Jimmy Stewart. You don't have to stand, you don't have to speak. Yes, there have been filibusters like that. That was performance theater. The reality is one senator raises their hand, speaks up, sends a note or an email to whoever happens to be running the Senate that day. This is the Speaker or the Senate Majority Leader Pro Tem or the President Pro Tem of the Senate, and says, "I object to this legislation." And at that point, it takes 60 votes to stop it out of 100. Now, there are only 50 Democrats in the United States Senate, plus the vice president. So we have 51 votes. But it takes 60 votes to move a piece of legislation forward over the objection of one particular senator who might be bought off by one particular industry that legislation happens to be all about. This is not in the Constitution. In fact, in James Madison's entire lifetime, he died in 1836, the father of the Constitution, one of the younger guys, he was in his early 30s when he helped put the Constitution together in Philadelphia in 1787. When until the day Madison died, he objected to anything like the filibuster, as did virtually everybody in the founding generation. They would have considered it anti-democratic. The whole point of this country that they set up, the whole point of our governing system is the majority rules. There is wisdom in majorities. You may not like the outcome, but there is wisdom in majorities. This is the premise upon which every republic around the world that uses democratic elections is founded, including ours. So where'd the filibuster come from? Well, there's this guy named John C. Calhoun. He's sometimes referred to as the grandfather of the Confederacy. He first was elected to the House of Representatives. Then he ran for president, and this was back in the day when John Quincy Adams was running for president that same year. This would have been, the election of 1828, I think? I'd have to go back and look, I'm sorry. But, right around that time, right around 1830. He ran for president, and he came in second. And back in those days, this was before they'd amended the Constitution, back in those days, whoever came in second became vice president. So John C. Calhoun, now John Quincy Adams became president. He was outspokenly opposed to slavery. John Quincy Adams was John Adams' son. He was so opposed to slavery that after he left the White House, Congress had passed a law that the word slavery may not be mentioned on the floor of the House of Representatives. So after John Quincy Adams left the White House, he ran for the House of Representatives from Massachusetts, from his town of Massachusetts, won, and every single day the House was in session, for years, John Quincy Adams would stand up and speak the word slavery. and try to initiate a debate on it. Over on the Senate side, though, well, as I said, John Quincy Adams, his vice president was John C. Calhoun. Then the next president was Andrew Jackson, and his vice president was John C. Calhoun, too, who was still running for president. So in the middle of the Andrew Jackson presidency, the famous Indian killer guy, that was, he loved being called that. In the middle of that presidency, a Senate seat opened up from South Carolina, which is where Calhoun was from. He resigned the vice presidency. He and Spiro Agnew are the only two vice presidents to have ever resigned. He resigned the vice presidency. The governor of the state of South Carolina put him in as the United States Senator, one of the two senators from South Carolina. And this is right around 1836, whatever the year was, in the mid-late 1830s. And John C. Calhoun invented the filibuster to prevent in the Senate what John Quincy Adams was doing in the House of Representatives, which was trying to have a discussion about slavery. And it worked. John C. Calhoun, the guy who gave a floor speech saying that not only was slavery not a bad thing, it was a, quote, positive good. That's John C. Calhoun, open advocate of slavery, owner of enslaved human beings. He created the filibuster to stop any discussion about slavery, and that worked right up until the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, as historian Adam Gentleson notes, quote, from the 87 years between when Reconstruction ended until 1964, that would have been 1876 until 1964, the only category of legislation against which the filibuster was deployed to actively stop bills in their tracks was civil rights legislation. It was still all about race. It was still all about white supremacy. LBJ got the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act passed a filibuster. The Southern conservatives tried to filibuster both simply by, but not simply, it was a hell of a lift, by mobilizing American voters. He got people really outraged. Well, now the filibuster is not so much being used to stop civil rights legislation, although that's true. It's mostly being used to defend big corporate interests. And we've got two Democratic senators, Joe Manchin, who wants to defend oil and coal. He's from West Virginia, coal state, right? And Kyrsten Sinema, who wants to defend big banks and insurance companies, have both come out and said they will not vote to end the filibuster. It only takes 51 votes to end the filibuster. And we've got two Democrats who are saying, no, we want to be able to continue to protect the industries that fund our campaigns. So, I published this piece, as I said, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. If you want to call either of these senators and your two senators, and I would strongly recommend you consider doing that, the number for the congressional switchboard is 202-224-3121. I'll give you that again in just a second. And just call them and say, hey, it's time to end the filibuster. It's a racist anachronism. Let's bring democracy to the Senate.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The number for the Senate switchboard, 202-224-3121. We'll be back. I mean, this is a serious thing. In fact, in the op-ed that I wrote today, I pointed out that the filibuster is not only being used to defend these corporations and their money interests. The filibuster, if the filibuster isn't ended, the entire planet is at risk, because senators beholden to the oil industry, the coal industry, the natural gas industry, the fossil fuel refining industry. There's a whole bunch of industries that are very much into all this. Both Democrats and Republicans are using this. Anyhow, I'll rant about that more in just a moment. But Carol in Philadelphia. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tom, yes, Democrats and Republicans both use it. I love Bernie. I'm a Bernie-crat. But Bernie's famous 2010 filibuster lasted, 8.5 hours, a marathon. And it was about a tax relief bill he was trying to get for working people and the working poor. Can you comment on, hopefully that won't I'm afraid Mitch will use that playbook and, comment on that, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, what Bernie was doing was not so much a filibuster. I mean, he called it a filibuster because, enough people, and certainly from Bernie's generation, had seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington that they think that there's something noble about the filibuster. There's nothing noble about the filibuster. But what Bernie did was he invoked his privilege as a senator to stand and speak. And, you have to have a certain number of senators, and I don't recall if it's a majority or a supermajority, to block somebody from speaking. And so basically Bernie just stood up and gave a long, long speech, and it got turned into a book. In fact, that was his first best-selling book. It's called The Speech. But it wasn't so much a filibuster as it was a performance. And but you're right. Democrats have used the filibuster to advance their and Joe Manchin is saying, hey, I want to be able to. Essentially, Joe Manchin is saying, I want to be able to use the filibuster to advance the interests of the coal industry in West Virginia. And Kyrsten Sinema is saying, I want to be able to use the filibuster or join with my also owned by the big banks colleagues to protect big finance. And, that's just the bottom line of it. Carol, thanks for the call. Michael in Reading, Pennsylvania. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Wanted to talk to you about the filibuster. Personally, I think they should just get rid of it right away. Just eliminate it. And here's why. Most people are for, everything that the Dems want to pass right now. And so let's just get rid of the filibuster, pass all the legislation that everyone's for, and then when the Republicans get back in office, if they want to try to take that stuff away, dare them to. I think they'll have a hard time.
I'm totally with you, Michael, but you've got West Virginia's Joe Manchin and Arizona's Kyrsten Sinema, who are both saying, no, we kind of like the filibuster. It helps out our big corporate donors. So, but Michael's spot on. Yeah, well, that's why you need to call 202-224-3121 and let them know what you think. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. So remember back in 2020 when in California, Uber and Lyft were pouring all kinds of money into Prop 22, which basically would allow them to continue claiming that their drivers weren't actually employers of Uber. They were actually contract workers. They were all independent small businesses. And therefore, the company didn't have to pay for unemployment insurance, didn't have to pay for workman's compensation if somebody got injured, didn't have to offer them any health insurance. In fact, basically couldn't even do it. And there's a whole bunch of other benefits that are associated and protections that you actually get, state and federal protections that you get as an employee that you do not have available to you as a contractor. Well, it passed because of millions of dollars from Uber, and now the fallout is happening. Companies across California are starting to fire their workers and telling them, we'll hire you back. I give examples in our new video over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. So we can talk about the filibuster. The other thing that some senators like about the filibuster is it gives them an excuse. Right, back in I think it was 2012. Let me look it up here. Yeah, it was in 2012 when Sandy Hook happened. Remember this? 20 first graders, 6 and 7 year olds were slaughtered along with 6 adults. And two senators, Pat Toomey, Republican from Pennsylvania, and Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, the very Joe Manchin who is opposing ending the filibuster right now, proposed legislation that would have strengthened background checks. Just real simple stuff. They weren't banning guns or anything. It was just background checks. 55 senators were in favor of it out of 100. That's a majority. And 90% of the American public supported it, according to multiple public opinion polls. They ran from 83% up to 90%, the support, depending on whose poll you looked at. And so Pat Toomey and Joe Manchin brought this to the floor of the Senate, and some random senator said, I object. And all of a sudden, it went from needing a simple majority, 50 votes to become law, to needing 60 votes to become law. And of course, they only had 55 votes, and so it died. This is how it works. And the reason why so many Democrats, or a few Democrats, and all the Republicans continue to love the filibuster, and we heard this over and over and over and over again from Democrats during Barack Obama's presidency. They, even when he had a majority in the Senate, they would say, well, it would be nice to pass single-payer health care, but we don't have 60 votes. We got to hit that 60-vote limit. You can't do it without 60 votes. And it's like a way of passing the buck, right? It's not my fault. I don't control 60 votes. I just control one vote. It was BS then. It's BS now. And Manchin and Sinema need to get with the program. Meanwhile, state Republicans are scrambling to enact new voter legislation, anti-voter legislation. And this is the thing. Karl Rove just published a piece in the Wall Street Journal about this. Now, when he does that, you need to take it very, very seriously. Back in 2009, Karl Rove published a piece in the Wall Street Journal talking about their program to basically use the census outcome to gerrymander a whole bunch of states. They had identified 107 legislative seats, and they were going to redraw the congressional district lines for 190 congressional seats. This is their program is called Red Map, Project Red Map. Karl Rove just laid it right out in the Wall Street Journal. No secret. Hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to screw the Democrats for a generation. And here's how we're going to do it. And the Democrats read that in the Wall Street Journal and thought, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not so worried. And Rove did it. He pulled it off. Well, yesterday he published a piece in the Wall Street Journal saying that, here's what he said. He said, Republicans, GOP election officials, and legislatures must create a model election code. He said Republicans should encourage GOP secretaries of state and state lawmakers to develop a model election code. And what might that include? Well, for example, end absentee voting. In Arizona right now, there is legislation in the Arizona legislature to make it so that the only way that you can vote by mail in Arizona is if you have a doctor's slip. If you can prove you're disabled. You're so disabled you can't come to the polls. In Kentucky, the Republicans are trying to pass a law stripping their Democratic governor, I think that's Andy Beshear, stripping his authority to implement emergency election changes during a pandemic. In other words, making it easier for people to vote by mail. In Montana, the Republicans have legislation to end same-day registration. In New Hampshire, they're looking to do the same thing. In Georgia, where for a century they have used basically election rigging strategies, voter suppression strategies, like shutting down, in the weeks before an election, shutting down polling places in black neighborhoods, opening up extra polling places in white neighborhoods. They are now trying to basically put into law things in Georgia that will certify, that will cement that the ability of them to do that, as well as making it harder to vote by mail. And why is that? Because that whole strategy of shutting down polling places in black neighborhoods and opening more polling places in white neighborhoods that has kept Georgia in Republican hands for years, and not just Georgia, by the way, Alabama does this, Mississippi does this, Louisiana does this, Florida does this. All these red states, all of them do this. That's how they win elections. And that gets blown up with vote by mail. Because if they close the polling place down the street from your house, it doesn't matter if you can drop your ballot in the mailbox. So get ready. Karl Rove and the Republicans are coming for your... because they know that's the only way they can continue to hold on to power in this country on behalf of their billionaire and big corporate donors. It's coming. I've got some more news, and we'll pick up your calls after the break.
202-808-9925.
Red states are undercounting COVID. Surprise, surprise. We'll talk about that, and I'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This is from the introduction, titled The Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms. a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the third highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. Book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
On the Science Revolution, Dr. Justin A. Frank is here on the psychology of mob mentality and violence. What propels a mob? Dr. Sam Metz, a member of Mad as Hell Doctors, drops by on the need for federal legislation to allow individual states to create true statewide universal health care plans, especially single-payer plans. Plus, in Geeky Science, I've discovered how 11 minutes can save the quality of your life. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, this is insidious. Boston University School of Public Health has just done a fascinating kind of county-by-county study of COVID deaths and what are called excess deaths. If you look at, year after year after year in a particular county or state, you can see, okay, typically every year, X number of people die in this county. 30,000 people die a year in this county. Or 5,000 a year die in this county, whatever it may be, or 500 a year, depending on whether it's a small rural county or some big city. When the number of people who die goes up above the average over the previous years, those are called excess deaths. And excess deaths tend to follow things like massive heat waves. We had the situation here in Portland where we couldn't breathe for several days because the forest fires were coming in. There were excess deaths from the forest fires. There will probably be excess deaths from people who had lung damage and heart damage as a consequence of that. You can track those things. I mean, it's a great epidemiological tool. And over the last 12 months, the principal driver of excess deaths in the United States has been COVID deaths that were not defined on their death certificates as COVID deaths. And there's always going to be some, somebody dies of COVID in their home and somebody comes and finds their body and calls the police and the mortician comes or the medical examiner comes and says, yep, he's dead. And, no time to do an autopsy, no need to do an autopsy. It's obviously, it wasn't murder. And so it just, it looks like a heart attack. Or maybe it was a heart attack, but was it a heart attack caused by COVID? Or was it a stroke caused by COVID? These are some of the main ways that COVID kills people, in addition to basically drowning them in their own lung tissue, which is a horrible way to die. So they're looking at the difference, and what they found was the counties that Donald Trump got the most votes in. They took the 25% of U.S. counties that got the most votes for Trump as a percentage of the votes in the county, had on average 163 excess deaths for every 100 COVID deaths. 163. Whereas counties that Trump didn't carry by large margins, that's the other 3/4 of America, you had 44 excess deaths for every 100 COVID deaths. Now, 44 versus 163 looks to me like almost 4 to 1. I mean, that's massive. They're speculating is, why are these people not being diagnosed as COVID deaths? In some cases, it's political pressure. In some cases, in some of these counties, the local medical examiner is an elected position. They are Republicans. They are beholden to Republicans, things like that. I mean, there's a variety of possible reasons why this is not the case. Why they're not diagnosing, why they're not putting COVID on their death certificates. But it looks like, we think that we have, we're closing in at 420,000 dead Americans as a result of Donald Trump's unwillingness to do anything about COVID for almost a full year. If you take in the excess deaths that are almost certainly related to COVID, the real number is probably well over 500,000, over an additional 100,000. It's mind-boggling. Politics, right? Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here. Paula in Miami, Florida. Hey, Paula, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Those two Democrat senators, can't the other senators take them aside and say, look, you were elected by Democrats, and Democrats pretty much from wherever you come from want the same things. And if that's not the case, who do they usually vote along with the most, Republicans or Democrats? Because maybe they need to be primaried.
Yeah, these are so-called conservative Democrats, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, and I think that what they would say to you, although I'm not a mind reader, but just, having been watching politics most of my life, I think what they would say to you is, in fact, in West Virginia, Joe Manchin would say, I've got a lot of Republicans who are voting for me. And Kyrsten Sinema, the same thing in Arizona. Arizona is a very purple state. I've got a lot of Republicans who are voting for me, and I want to hang on to their votes. And Republicans don't want to get rid of the filibuster, so I'm not going to get rid of the filibuster. Now, I believe that the real reason why Sinema and Manchin are refusing to vote to blow up the filibuster is because Sinema is deeply indebted, not in debt, but indebted to the banking and insurance industries. Joe Manchin owes a chunk of his political fortune to the coal and natural gas industries. And those industries have benefited tremendously over the decades from the filibuster. And so I think that's what's really going on, is that, they just, they want to protect their industries. But I'm with you. It's time to say something about it. It's time to do something about it. Paula, thank you for the call. Marilyn in Sun City, West Arizona. Hey, Marilyn, what's up?
Hey, Tom, my question is this, just because I don't understand. I get what you're saying about the filibuster, but being the resident Canadian, what I'm trying to understand, although I live in Arizona, is what is that relationship to the gavels? Why is it that because the Democrats have a majority, small as it is, that they don't automatically get the gavels for the committee chairs?
That has to do with what are called the organizing rules of the Senate. The Constitution provides that at the beginning of every congressional session, which is every 2 years we get what's called a new Congress. And that's because the entire House is up for re-election every 2 years, and then 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. Right. So at the beginning of every session, both the House and the Senate have to have a vote. In fact, it's typically the first vote or sometimes the second vote after the leadership votes. They have to have a vote on what the rules will be. How will they conduct themselves? What's allowed and what's not allowed? And the filibuster is simply part of the Senate rules. So also another part of the Senate rules is who gets to run the committees when it's 50-50. And back in 2001, when the Republicans had power, Trent Lott and was it Harry Reid? I believe Harry Reid was the Democratic Majority Leader at the time. But anyhow, the Republican Senate leader and the Republican Democratic leader got together, and basically the Democrats said, okay, you've got the White House with George W. Bush, you've got the House, you've got the Senate, you've got all the power. Well, it's 50-50 in the Senate. So what we'll do is we will acknowledge your power, and we'll let you basically make the decisions in the committees, even though the committees are 50-50. In other words, the committee chairs can be Republicans. So Chuck Schumer, that's the precedent that was set in 2001, in January of 2001, at the beginning of that new Congress. So Chuck Schumer said to Mitch McConnell, hey, we did this for you 20 years ago when we had an identical situation. So you do it for us this time. We'll just, the exact same rules, only instead of the Republicans running the committees, because we don't have a Republican president, we don't have a Republican-controlled House of Representatives, and we don't have a Republican-controlled Senate. Instead of the Republicans running the committees, how about the Democrats run the committees? And up until about 9 o'clock Eastern time last night, Mitch McConnell was saying, I'm not going to go for that deal unless you will include in the rules or somehow nail it down that you're not going to do away with the filibuster. Because once the filibuster is gone, Mitch McConnell loses all his power. That's what that's all about.
Argument. When
Manchin and Sinema came out and said, we will not vote to end the filibuster, period, no way, and both of them said, nobody's going to convince me otherwise. When they came out and said that, that gave Mitch McConnell the space to say, okay, I'll go along with the deal, and the Democrats can run the committees. Or at least that's the kabuki theater that we all saw.
And I understand that, Tom. I don't understand why, where the law is, aside from the filibuster, that Mitch McConnell doesn't, because he's not technically in power anymore, why he doesn't have to give up the gavels to a majority Democratic Senate.
Because it's in the Senate rules can say anything. The Senate rules could, if you can get 51 senators to agree to it, the Senate rules could start out that, everybody has to wear a clown nose at 9 o'clock every morning. It's literally, they make up their own rules. And so the rules so
Mitch
far
McConnell
have
could
been...
hold the gavels forever.
Well, if 51 senators agree, yes. But because... You've got the tie-breaking vote for the gavel, for the main gavel, for the main Senate.
Right.
The tie-breaking vote is Kamala Harris. So there's 51 votes to 50 votes. That gave the gavel for the Senate to Chuck Schumer. But on the committees are all 50-50. So the Senate has to come up with rules to decide who runs the committees. And that's what was in flux yesterday. And arguably, Sinema and Manchin gave Mitch McConnell some face saving. But it's still a disaster. Marilyn, thank you for the call.
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I realize it sounds kind of wonky, but the bottom line is this is going to determine whether we can get long-term unemployment, climate change, just so much stuff, right? And welcome back. Let's see here. John in Los Angeles. Hey, John, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for being a true patriot. I'll take your analogy off the air, but they crossed the Rubicon, JFK, Bobby K, probably John K, too. If Trump would have if Trump had gotten away with it, he would have instilled martial law, executed politicians, journalists, remember Khashoggi, and dissenters who do not go along with...
If Trump had done away with what?
With his political coup, with, raiding the Capitol.
Right.
And I equate Biden's kumbaya of complete naivety. It's like the peaceful protesters back at Kent State when they put flowers in the M16s of the National Guard. Now he's putting a flower in the barrel of the sniper who wants to kill him. And I think Chuck Schumer should go down in history as the Neville Chamberlain, the modern Neville Chamberlain. And in your regards to the smuck in West Virginia...
Well, hang on just a second, John. Let me respond to what you just said. I am willing to give Chuck Schumer a few more weeks. But this, I think, is going to be a really consequential moment. And last night on Rachel Maddow's show, Chuck Schumer said, she said, well, what are you going to do about the filibuster? And he was like, I got something up my sleeve. And she was like, what is that? And frankly, I have no idea what he's got up his sleeve. And he was not willing to tell Rachel. So whether what he has up his sleeve is that he's going to offer Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin some incredibly, plum thing, or make them committee chairs or something in exchange for their doing away with their opposition to the filibuster, or whether he's got some other legislative way around the filibuster, I don't know. But, we'll find out. Anyhow, John, where were you going with that?
Well, it's just going to be the same old. But, as far as Manchin and the other smuck, let's not give them the decency of the Democratic platform. If they're going to be Republicans, find some way to either kick them out or I understand. But if he's killing his constituents off left and right, sooner or later they're going to get it. And you would hope that somebody would, vote for a Democrat that wants to, give them health care and whatnot and many other things. And, instead of like padding their, I just did a recent research.
But John, it's really difficult to primary a sitting senator, A, and B, it's particularly difficult to do it around a piece of legislative procedure like the filibuster. I guarantee you the filibuster in Arizona and West Virginia is not going to enrage enough citizens that they will mount a primary challenge against Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema. And threatening them is just going to piss them off. Instead, I think we need to appeal to them and say, please, this is vital to our future as a country and as a world. If we're going to have any kind of legislation that does anything, with climate change, which could be a civilization ender, we're gonna have to get rid of the filibuster because you've got so many members of the Senate, every single member of the Republican Party, who are basically wholly owned by oil billionaires like the Koch brothers, well, the brother who's left, that ain't nothing going to happen unless we get rid of the filibuster.
That's true,
John. I got to run, but thank you for the call, and I appreciate your comments. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We're right here. Stick around. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. There's so much news coming out of the Trump administration, so much corruption, so many crimes. Now they're letting people kill endangered species. Now they're selling off, the Arctic National Wildlife Preserve refuge to big oil companies. Now they're they're authorizing pesticides that we know cause birth defects and damage to children. It's just step after step after step that it's so easy to forget that back in July of 2020 it was reported that Jared Kushner and Mike Pence's nephew John Pence created a couple of LLCs, American-Made Media Consultants Corporation, that took $617 million of Trump campaign cash, and nobody knows where it went. I'm telling you, these guys are professional grifters. We need to keep an eye on it. There's a whole rant about it over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. Welcome back. Terry in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how you doing, sir? I did catch that Rachel Maddow interview with Chuck Schumer, which I thought was amazing. I do believe he said that even if he can't get rid of the filibuster, he can modify it. I think he was saying like he could bring it down to 45 or less than the 60 votes.
Yeah, well,
needed,
that's
that way he can
a
still keep
possibility.
It.
Yeah,
Well,
it used to be
awesome,
66
that would
votes,
appease
and then it
the-
got reduced to
yeah,
60 votes. And it used to apply to
but you can
everything, and
modify
then
it
they did
more.
away with federal judges, and then they did away with Supreme Court judges. Mitch McConnell got rid of the filibuster for the Supreme Court just so he could get Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. So,
I believe the modification
what's good for the
still
goose and all that
appease
kind
the
of.
two Democrats. I'm sorry, sir. I thought the modification might appease the two Democrats. That way, they're not really technically losing the filibuster. It's just modified to where it's actually fair.
Right. But even if they took the filibuster to 52 votes, right, so that one Republican could block legislation, I guarantee you there's always going to be one Republican.
It's unfortunate that it seems like we have the power, but we don't have the power.
Right. Well, this is the thing. I mean, we'll see, as they say. We'll see. Terry, thanks a lot for the call. Dave in Valley Ford, California. What about John C. Calhoun?
Well, you said he was chosen the old way that they used to choose vice presidents, and the 12th Amendment changed that, where the president and vice president were elected on the same
you're right.
party.
And that was in, 1807 or something like that? That was during the Jefferson presidency, wasn't it?
1804. So
1804.
I'm not sure how, in the election of 1824 with Quincy Adams, that was decided by the House of Representatives. So I don't know what happened in that election.
That's right. Yeah, nobody had a majority. Nobody had a clear majority of the electoral vote, and therefore it got thrown to the House. That's right. Thank you for refreshing my memory, Dave. During the next break, I'm going to have to go edit my piece.
Okay, and then just one thing. Just one thing. The Republicans always say government doesn't work. Then they get elected and prove it. So said Will Rogers back whenever.
Yeah. This goes back a long, long way. Dave, thanks so much for the call. I am so honored and privileged to be hanging out with some of the smartest people in the country every day for 3 hours here, and you're one of them. Dave, thank you. I really appreciate that call. Rob in Long Island, New York City. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. To kind of go move forward on the caller just before, who was saying lower the number of votes needed to end the filibuster. Why don't we just go back? I had this problem in 2009 when Harry Reid, knowing what Mitch McConnell was going to do, Harry Reid didn't change this rule then. We need to go back to people. You actually said this at the time. We need to go back to people standing up and speaking, and they stand and they talk, and when they can't talk anymore, and when they have to leave, then the vote happens. We need to stop with this eternal filibuster. If you
well, that might be what Mitch McConnell's thinking of doing. That we'll keep the filibuster, but you have to speak. Chuck Schumer. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that may be what he's got up his sleeve. That makes sense.
I hope it is,
Rob,
because that way they can get. That way they technically are abiding by what Manchin and Sinema are saying they refuse to do. Okay, we'll keep the filibuster, so now you can vote yes, but now they have to stand and speak. Right, but you have to stand up and speak, and the filibuster ends the minute that you sit down or you stop speaking, which has never been the way it actually worked. I mean, early on when they were when John C. Calhoun and his friends were figuring this out, it sort of worked that way, but really that's more a Hollywood creation. But it's how most people think the filibuster still works. So, why not do it? Why not institute it? I'm with you. That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Rob. I appreciate the call. Vicky in Muskegon, Michigan. Hey, Vicky, what's up?
Hi, Tom. If Sinema and Manchin, have to please their donors, and they want to please banks and coal, perhaps our approach should be to banks and coal. Banks, what are you doing for your clientele? What are you doing for your black clientele? Or what are you doing to them? Maybe some guilt that direction would be more effective.
It's almost impossible to lobby a bank, Vicki. I mean, they've got all this money. They've got these high-powered lobbyists, most of whom are former members of Congress or staffers. It's a huge insider network. They spend millions and millions of dollars on it, and you can't just call up your local Bank of America branch and say, "Stop the filibuster." I wish we could.
I like it.
And maybe some boycotts would be a good thing. But Vicki, I get what you're saying. That the special interests here are the ones pulling the strings by and large. And I think that's absolutely true. How do we deal with that? Well, that's what H.R. 1 is all about, which the Koch brothers, or Charles Koch, Freedom Works actually, is all hysterical about. I got another email from them this morning. They're calling it the Gag Act, and all this kind of stuff. It's crazy. Vicki, thank you for the call. Some great ideas today. Some great ideas. Stick around. We're going to be back. We're going to talk about the war in Yemen. This is going to. You think this is dry? This is going to be this is going to amaze you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
For Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century. Their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire. Or a hasty pejorative. Nuking the moon and other intelligence schemes, our book for the day.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Medea Benjamin, activist, co-founder of Code Pink and Global Exchange, author of the absolutely brilliant book, Kingdom of the Unjust, Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection. Codepink.org and globalexchange.org are her websites. You can tweet her at Medea, M-E-D-E-A, Benjamin. And Medea, welcome back. Tell us I believe the last time we talked, we were talking about the war in Yemen, how Saudi Arabia's gotten into it, now Iran's gotten into it. You want to give us just an overview of what that situation is right now and how it got this way?
This started under the Obama administration when, in exchange for signing the Iran nuclear deal, Obama agreed to be helping the Saudis in their intervention in Yemen. And just kind of like it was with the U.S. invasion of Iraq, remember where they said it was going to be 3 months, I think was the maximum, and it was going to be over. The idea here from the brilliant King, the Crown Prince bin Salman is, we can deal with this in a couple of weeks. Well, now it's been 5 years. And it's been a devastating war. I would say the Iranians were not involved when it started, but became involved over time. And it has been, it's made Yemen the poorest country in the world that's now not only facing tremendous starvation, but also the pandemic and without the ability to provide any relief to the people. So it's a desperate situation, and with the Biden administration, it's time to get the U.S. out of this horrible war and push the Saudis to end it.
Right. So with my understanding of how this happened, and please correct me because I'm sure this is very incomplete, was that basically there was this Houthi rebellion, essentially a coup. The Houthis are Shia Muslims. The Saudis are Sunni Muslims. They came in to defend the Sunni regime. Stop me at any point if I got anything wrong, please. And using U.S. weapons, started bombing the crap out of the country and going after the Houthis. At that point, the Houthis' fellow Shias, the Iranians, now this was after this all started as a result of Obama greenlighting this for the Saudis. Then the Iranians said, well, our buddies are being slaughtered, and so they jumped into it. And so now it's an all-out proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and tens of millions of people are in the crosshairs. Over 1 million people are at risk of starving to death, or are actively starving to death as we speak. Tens of millions of people have been rendered homeless. I believe it's winter there. I'm not sure how far north of the equator Yemen is. I've never been there. Is that a good summary?
Yes, and then on top of that, we have the parting slap from Pompeo putting the Houthis on the foreign terrorist organization list, which makes it more difficult for humanitarian organizations to help people in the Houthi-controlled areas, which are quite populous. So that's something else that we need Biden to do right away, which is take the Houthis off of that terrorist list.
So what has the Biden administration said about that? My understanding is they have not yet done anything. There's a couple of things in the balance here. One is Donald Trump started just shoveling weapons at Mohammed bin Salman at Saudi Arabia. Of course, they're his good buddies. And that has exacerbated the situation. But what could be done? What has the Biden administration suggested that they might do? And what would you recommend?
Yeah, one time the Biden called Saudi Arabia a pariah state. He was very upset about the murder of Khashoggi and also about the devastation in Yemen, even though it was under his administration with Obama that this started. But he has said he wants to get the U.S. out of this war, and we are, as activists, are trying two tracks. One is to pressure the administration to do that by executive order, and the second is to reintroduce the War Powers Act that had passed miraculously both houses of Congress and was vetoed when it got to the president's desk, and this time it won't get vetoed, and that means it will be in law. So those are the two paths that we're doing. In addition, as I mentioned, it's essential to quickly take the Houthis off of that terrorist list so that humanitarian organizations can work there. And the other is pressuring the Saudis to stop the war and to pledge significant money to rebuilding Yemen. And the calculations we have made are that the U.S. should be giving about $1.2 billion for Yemen to begin that rebuilding process.
So, we were talking about the filibuster in the last hour, and it's a fairly straightforward process to call your senator and say, or your two senators and say, end the filibuster, please. How do we lobby or make this happen? You said, we're progressive activists, and you, Medea Benjamin, and Code Pink, and you're all working toward this. What can people who are listening or watching this program right now do?
Well, I mentioned that this had passed both the Senate and the House before, which means that there are Republicans who think this is a horrible war to be in, who are disgusted with the Saudis' behavior. And so this is really doable. They should call their congressperson and say, after 5 years of participating in the destruction of Yemen, it's time to get out, stop supporting the Saudi-led war, and take the Houthis off of the foreign terrorist list so that humanitarian aid can get to the population under their control.
So this is still lobby Congress, essentially. Now, I also seem to recall, Medea, early on in the war, that there were reports that the Saudis were using white phosphorus, which is banned in international warfare. It just causes god-awful burns, and worse than napalm, I guess. And that they were also using these bombs, these cluster munitions, these bombs that you drop a giant bomb and it's got all these little tiny bomblets in it, and little kids think the bomblets are toys and they pick them up and then blow their hands off. Am I remembering that correctly? And am I also remembering correctly that in both cases those weapons were made here in the United States? And is that still going on, if I'm remembering this right?
Well, the cluster bombs were actually manufactured in the UK, and it was this was back in 2016, 2017 that there was an outcry against the use of these cluster munitions. I would think that they're probably not being used now, but bombs are being used. Bombs are just continuing to destroy healthcare facilities, water facilities. I mean, part of the reason that there's so much cholera and disease is that the bombing has destroyed the infrastructure in so many parts of the country.
Yeah. So, wow, we've got a big job here to do. I mean, this is a really big project. Go ahead.
Yes, but, it's also related to the issue of Iran, and I don't know, do we have time to talk about that for...
No, we've got 10 seconds, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yes.
But you'll have to come back.
But we'd love to do that. Thanks so much.
Okay. You finish your thought. We need to what? Very quickly.
We need to have a totally different policy towards the Middle East, and that's let's hope that Biden is up to doing that.
Yeah, amen. I'm totally with you. Medea Benjamin, one of the great activists in this country, co-founder Code Pink and Global Exchange. Medea Benjamin. Thanks, Medea. Great talking with you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. 15 minutes past the hour. Stick around. And welcome back. David in South Pasadena, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I love your show, and I tend to agree with you 99.5% of the time. But I'm confused. I want to challenge you or ask you to explain more why you're so dismissive of the idea of the primary from the left with these senators, Manchin and Sinema, and others who really might be called Dinos, Democrats in name only, because I think that's at least as likely to work as appealing to the better angels of their nature, and it certainly seems to work well for the Trumpists. Just the threat of a right-wing primary challenge often, modifies the behavior of Republicans. So could you explain more about why you just see that as not, a viable strategy here?
Sure. Yeah, well, two steps. First of all, the reason why a primary threat works for Republicans is because well over half of the Republican electorate, I would say probably 70 or 80% of the Republican electorate, if you look at, popularity polls and what percentage of Republicans, people who voted Republican in the last election still support Donald Trump, it's a really high percentage. So on the Republican side, there is a really large base that can turn out on a primary and kick somebody out of office. In the House, it's a whole lot easier. In the Senate, it's a little harder. But in both cases, there, you got people running scared. And I think that may have something to do with why Rob Portman has said he's not going to run for re-election in Ohio, in 2 years. With regard to the Democratic side, we don't have a large and strong progressive base that is anything close to 50% of all the Democrats. The congressional progressives are roughly 50%, but it's still less than 50%. There's only about 100 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. There's 224, I think, Democratic senators or members of the House. So the threat of a primary is not taken all that seriously by these so-called moderate Democrats like Manchin and Sinema, number one, for that reason. And then number two, both of them have been reelected. And once a senator has been reelected, it's almost impossible to extract them. We've been seeing this for years and years on the Democratic side with, for example, Dianne Feinstein. And third, they've got enormous financial resources. I mean, they both now have tens of millions of dollars in their war chests for elections, which includes primaries, so they can use the power of incumbency. So I'm not saying that I'm opposed to trying to primary either one of them. I would much rather see a good progressive senator from West Virginia and a good progressive senator from Arizona. And I think a good progressive senator from either state over time would have, a better chance of getting reelected and would be a good thing for the states and for the country. In this particular case, with these particular people around this particular issue, like I said earlier, I don't think the filibuster is a big enough issue. It's so policy, it's so in the weeds. I don't think it's a big enough issue that it mobilizes, more than 5 or 10% of the base. So you add all those things together.
You don't run on the procedurals. I mean, and that's a very good case, right? But you don't run on the procedural issue. You run on the failed votes. The fact that the things that people want, like single-payer health care, et cetera, are not getting passed because these people are supporting processes that prevent it from getting passed.
But then they'll just run an ad saying, "Oh no, I supported that climate bill. We just couldn't get 60 votes." See, that was my point earlier. They've been hiding behind the filibuster, all these people, for years and years and years. But those are my thoughts, David. I may be wrong, but that's what I think. On the Science Revolution, Dr. Justin A. Frank is here on the psychology of mob mentality and violence. What propels a mob? Dr. Sam Metz, a member of Mad as Hell Doctors, drops by on the need for federal legislation to allow individual states to create true statewide universal health care plans, especially single-payer plans. Plus, in Geeky Science, I've discovered how 11 minutes can save the quality of your life. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Hey, I've got a geeky science here for you. Marcos Melitsas actually, I believe, threw this thing together, or maybe it was the Daily Kos staff. But he was talking about, it's titled Wellness for Activists. If you just do one thing for yourself, let it be this. Now, I've talked in the past about some of these, it's kind of a recurring feature in the New York Times about high intensity interval training where you pedal really, really hard on your home bicycle for literally just 1 or 2 minutes and then rest for 5 or 10 minutes. And then you do it again, and you do that a bunch of times during the course of an hour, and how that can be as effective as really, hard long-term exercise. But it turns out that just walking is so useful. This just some of the details here of this that were pulled together by the staff over at Daily Kos. Walking just 30 minutes a day reduces your chance of coronary heart disease by 19%. 30 minutes a day. Now, the average person walks about 3 miles an hour, which is a mile every 20 minutes. So that's just a 1.5 mile walk. It's not that big a deal, right? A 30-minute walk. Walking in the fasted state, in other words, walking in the morning before you eat breakfast, or if you don't eat breakfast, walking before you eat lunch or dinner, whatever your thing may be. But walking in a fasted state speeds up the burning of fat. The meta-analysis of 27 studies found that there was a significant increase in fat oxidation during exercise performed in the fasted compared to the fed state. And that just makes sense. I mean, if you haven't eaten anything in the last 12 or 15 hours, if you overnight anyway, you don't have a lot of circulating blood sugar, as it were. And so when your muscles start requiring energy, it forces your body to burn fat. I mean, you have some glycogen that's stored in your liver and in your muscles, but that gets burned through fairly quickly. And so that then the body starts boiling off fat and converting it to energy. Very simple, very straightforward. Our genes have something to do with our health, but the expression of our genes, that is our genes being turned on or off, genes that help us become healthy or genes that hurt us in terms of being healthy, are actually altered by walking. By walking, they note you are literally instructing your genes to behave in a more healthy fashion. That's GENES. Yes, your genes are. Anyhow, walking for about an hour a day can reduce the weight-promoting effect of certain genes by 50%, according to a piece in Time magazine. Quote, what's more, the scientists say, sedentary activities like watching TV can trigger the weight-gaining effect of the same genes. So these genes that regulate our weight notice when we're moving a lot and when we're not. And when we're not moving a lot, they kind of kick us into hibernation mode and we start getting fatter and fatter. And when we are moving a lot, they kick us into activity mode and we start burning that fat, or we accumulate less of it. Here's another one. This is a study of 13,535 women over 70. And what they found is that women over 70 who walk every day live longer. And this wasn't sample bias. This wasn't that they picked a bunch of healthy women over 70 and said, you walk. It's the other way around. Physical activity, this is from the study. Physical activity is associated with reduced risks of chronic diseases and premature death. In terms of magnitude, walking is almost equivalent to the benefit gained from more vigorous physical activity. In the same study, they found women who walk 7 or more hours a week, that would be basically taking a 1 hour a day walk instead of 30 minutes. Women who walk, which would be 3 miles a day, women who walk 7 or more hours a week have a 14% lower risk of breast cancer. This is a 17-year study of 74,000 postmenopausal women. They add a simple 30-minute walk boosts your immune system. One study found, quote, walking caused modest and short-lived changes in immune parameters, most notably for neutrophil and natural killer blood cell counts. Another study found that 7,000 steps might be the optimal target for people over 60. Oh, and walking reduces the negative effects of menopause on the immune system. A Mayo Clinic study of people between the ages of 70 and 89 found that those who walked 2 to 5 times a week during the ages of 50 to 65, in other words, this is looking at people 70 to 89 and asking, what did you do back when you were between 50 and 65? Those who had walked 2 to 5 times a week had a reduced risk of mild cognitive impairment. In other words, walking keeps your brain sharp. A 2013 study of older adults with mild cognitive impairment found that the farther participants were able to walk in 6 minutes, the better their memory functioned. And walking is a powerful pain reliever. It sends blood and triggers recovery to painful muscles and joints. And if you suffer from back pain, as blood is driven into the psoas and quadratus lumborum, deep stabilizing muscles that integrate the lumbar spine with the hips and pelvis complex, it brings it all together and reduces pain, back pain. And finally, another study found walking just 10 minutes a day, can prevent arthritis in the knees, hips, ankles, or feet. Heart benefits from walking start at 10 minutes and reach their peak, the peak benefit for your heart, at 30 minutes of walking, which again is, a mile and a half, a little less than 2 miles, not a big deal. So bottom line here, if you want to remain healthy and happy, walking can be a mood stabilizer too. And then there's also psychological exercises you can do when you walk. I wrote a whole book about this called Walking Your Blues Away, which is not about the benefits of the walking exercise, but about a psychological technique you can do while walking that deals with trauma and PTSD. And so it's like, it's the magic cure-all. And I tell you, there have been a couple of days when Louise and I, mostly because of the weather or because we were just insanely busy, have missed our daily, basically 2-mile walk. We walk for about 45 minutes every day. And even if I miss it for just one day, I notice that the next day my brain is not working quite as well and my body hurts more. And this is important stuff. Anyhow, geeky science for the day. We'll be back with more of the news of the day in your calls right after this.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Stick around. We'll be right back with your calls.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, "In light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads, and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air." End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Pose a supreme being.
You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com.
In our special video for our supporters, for people who support us over at thomhartmann.com, I am talking about how the House Democrats are coming up with basically, so far what we know is they're basically going to come up with this one big impeachment story, which is that Donald Trump was running a bribery and extortion scheme with Ukraine or against Ukraine in order to flip the 2020 election, in order to help get himself reelected. And that's pretty bad. But we're missing a whole bunch of things that I think, frankly, should be included in the articles of impeachment, whether it's defying campaign finance laws, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, or whether it's the emoluments stuff. This is, explicitly barred by the Constitution. Whether it's defying Congress, whether it's refusing to follow the law that says that, for example, the head of the Ways and Means Committee gets to see his taxes. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Susan in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Oh, well, I had called about Kirsten Sinema, being that I'm from Arizona, and as a precinct committee person, I did call her and tell her that if she didn't end the filibuster, we will consider that in the primary, or at least I said I would consider that, being a precinct committee person that was making like 350 calls to help turn Arizona blue. And we actually turned a state senator. She was against an incumbent who had been in a few legislative sessions, and she had been there a couple terms, and we took her down with our state senator.
Wow.
So we can do it. Yeah, it's possible. Although I see that we have some walls, as you shared in your when you answered another caller. But I do have a question about the filibuster to you. Is it if Chuck Schumer can change the vote count from 60 to 52, can he just end the filibuster without a vote?
No. The filibuster is written into the Senate's rules. The Senate can change its rules at any time with a simple majority vote, which is how Mitch McConnell, when it was obvious that Brett Kavanaugh was not going to get, 60 votes to become a Supreme Court justice, Mitch McConnell said, okay, that's it. We're going to change the filibuster rules. But it took 51 votes in order to make that change. Harry Reid before that had changed it to allow for federal judges, as I recall. And so because it's part of the Senate rules, it has to go through that process.
Oh, okay. Well, I wasn't sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Susan. And thank you for being a precinct committee person. That's such a big deal. And you're actually one of the people who picks your party's primary candidates, who vets them. And so, a call from you is a consequential call. Good on you. So thank you very much, Susan. It's great to hear from you. Jerry in St. Peters, Missouri. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'm a big fan. I just want to ask, Senator Schumer was elected for his majority position. Why is it then he was elected? Why did the DNC support that election if he cannot get 2 senators to vote to abolish the filibuster?
Right. Well, let's give him a week. Right. He insists that he has a solution to this problem. I am guessing that the solution is going to be that he's going to time limit the filibuster somehow, that it can't last more than a certain number of hours, a certain number of days, or it can't last longer than the amount of time that somebody is standing. But I could be wrong. We'll see. And but step by step.
Is this a problem that the Democrats have? That they just, I'm a Democrat. Is there a problem that we can't get our leaders to convince the senators to do something that's absolutely needed?
Yeah. This is.
Well, I'm glad you agree.
There are still remnants of in the Democratic Party. Not even remnants. It's probably a good 50% of the Democratic Party who are still very beholden to industries, in most cases, industries that are local to their states. Banking's a big deal in Arizona. Coal and natural gas are big deals in West Virginia. So, you can understand that. Senators have to respond to their state. It's just that's just life. But I do think that a mobilized public can bring some pressure to bear that would be a good thing. Hopefully. Thanks a lot for the call, Jerry. Jim in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Yes, sir. I've got a question. Since Schumer controls what bills will be discussed, can't he not threaten, but maybe tell Manchin and Sinema that their pet projects, they won't go up for a vote unless, they play ball and go along to end the filibuster?
He could. Odds are that it won't be just their pet projects, though, that, if whatever they might want to happen or want to block from happening probably has a number of constituents. They're not the only 2 conservative Democratic senators. And so, and also, I think, this early on in his leadership position, I'm guessing he's a little more wary about using that kind of punitive power. He may be dangling carrots, but whether he's using the stick or not, I'd be skeptical about that, and I'm not sure it would be a good idea or that I would advise him to do that. But like I said, this is early times. And, let's see how this shakes out. But I think we made a terrible mistake in the first few months, in the first 6 months or the first year of the Obama administration, when the Senate Democrats and and President Obama himself both said, well, we'll just kind of take it slow and we'll work with the Republicans and we're going to assume good faith and this, that, and look at all the changes that they made. Barack Obama and the Senate Democrats took the public option off the table in order to get Republican votes, because the Republicans said, hey, we can't have a public option. They didn't even go with single-payer health care because the Republicans said, no, you do with that, we're just going to vote against it. They made all kinds of concessions in the Affordable Care Act to get Republican votes. And then how many Republican votes did they get? 0. Not one in the House or the Senate. And so, and by the way, that wasn't the only time the Democrats made major concessions thinking that they were going to get Republican support, and then Mitch McConnell and the Republicans just, turned their backs and said, pulled the ball out again. I mean, it's Lucy and Charlie Brown here. I think that finally, after 2 decades of this, that Chuck Schumer and the Democrats and the Senate are figuring it out, and that's a good thing. So anyway, Jim, thanks a lot for the call. Wally in Warsaw, Missouri. Hey, Wally. The USS Cole?
Yes, sir. How you doing? I got a question for you. Do you remember what happened to the USS Cole in Yemen?
Yeah, it got bombed. The side of it got a hole blown out of it.
Killed 21 sailors.
Yep.
That you talk
now
about.
That was Al Qaeda. That was the Sunni group associated with Saudi Arabia. Not, I believe, and that was also 3 decades ago?
Yeah, but that was before the war even started.
Oh yeah, I mean that was a long time ago. I don't think any of this has anything to do with the USS Cole, but it's a good history lesson, and we do need to bring these things up. Wally, thanks a lot for the call. John in Portland. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for helping us all stay sane in these troubling times.
It's my own mental health exercises too. John.
Good. One of the things
keeps me sane.
Listening to you spurred me to do was to actually read the Constitution, and I wanted to ask you about the 14th Amendment, which has come up because of Article 3 and dealing with insurrection. But I'm wondering about Article 2. And it's a fairly long paragraph with a lot of doublespeak, but it can be boiled down to 3 short clauses that say, when the right to vote at any election, many clauses, is denied, many more clauses, the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number essentially of votes were denied. And what
Correct.
I'm wondering is, in the Voting Rights Act that they're in the process of trying to pass, if this can be used as a basis to counter both voter suppression and gerrymandering.
Conceivably, I think that the way that the Clause 2 of the 14th Amendment should be used, and I wrote an op-ed about this maybe 10 years ago, should be used, is in those places where Democrats have essentially irrefutable proof that Republicans are suppressing a vote, right? Shutting down polling places, throwing people off voting rolls, things like that. In those places, the Democrats should bring a lawsuit in federal court, and maybe even originated at the Supreme Court, against those states, saying that they should lose a member of Congress because they are suppressing the vote,
right.
Which is essentially what that says. And go ahead, John.
And I just, when you have, maybe when you have one of the representatives on the show, maybe you could bring this up with them. And
I will try to remember. I think Congressman Pocan will be with us tomorrow. In fact, I'll give you a special dispensation if you want to call back in tomorrow and try to ask him that question. John, thanks for the call.
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We normally limit callers to 1 call a week, but hey, I have pardon powers too. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Paula in Pontiac, Michigan. Hey, Paula, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Another filibuster question. If Mr. McConnell starts a filibuster, can he keep it going and going and going for like 2 years? He did that with Merrick Garland.
Right. Yeah. That's the problem right now, is that the filibuster is open-ended. Once an individual senator, it's just one senator, and in some cases they're even able to keep it secret who that one senator was. One senator notifies the majority leader, I object to this debate continuing, actually, is the technical part of it. It's, you have to have a vote to end debate before you can proceed to, this is the so-called motion to proceed to, an actual vote on the issue, right? And so if the debate never ends, the issue never gets resolved and there's never a vote. And so one senator right now can say, I object, and until they withdraw their objection, that's it. That legislation is dead. So Schumer may have the ability, maybe he thinks he can get through his caucus time limiting the filibuster, or somehow, some other way, for example, if filibuster only happens while you're standing and speaking, something like that. That might be a strategy that he could use. And that might be what he was talking about on Rachel's show last night, but nobody knows. Did I answer your question, Paula?
Yeah, and I'm still nervous. But thanks.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, Biden came in with a big agenda, and Democrats have a lot of really great legislation and a lot of really great ideas, and particularly H.R. 1, which I know the Republicans are going to oppose, fight tooth and nail. They already are. I'm flooded with emails from right-wing sources talking about the GAG Act, H.R. 1. They want to shut down wealthy donors and all this kind of stuff. And, we're going to need the Senate, and we're going to need the Senate functioning. So I am totally with you. Paula, thank you for the call. James in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, James, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for keeping me sane for the last 4 years. I watch you religiously.
Thank you.
Tom, I'm just wondering if it's so procedurally difficult to get rid of this. I mean, even though we got Kamala Harris as our breaking point, why not just public shame Manchin and that Arizona lady?
Well, that's what I did with the first hour of the show. Essentially.
That is true. Well, that is very true, Tom. But how about some of the senators getting some public time on MSNBC, CNN, or something to get the point across and say, hey, listen, we can't have this anymore in the Democratic Party. Nothing will ever get done.
Yeah. Yesterday on one of the MSNBC shows, and my apologies, I don't recall which one, I was just kind of walking through the living room and I caught this, and the host was saying, well, I'm going to try and get Manchin and Sinema on to explain their logic about the filibuster. And I walked out of the room kind of chuckling to myself, saying, good luck with that. But you never know. I mean, Joe Manchin loves to get in front of the camera, So,
yeah, he does. Well, the playbook that way works the other way around with the Republicans. They're really good at doing that,
Yeah. Although they're all hiding from the cameras right now. James, thanks for the call. That's also the piece that I wrote over at Medium.com too. ThomHartmann.medium.com is basically calling out Manchin and Sinema. And I did edit it, by the way, to include the correction that our caller shared with me about, the election of John Quincy Adams. And thank you for that. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com about conspiracy theories. Abby Richards came up with a kind of a hierarchy of conspiracies, maybe a variation on the old Maslow hierarchy. And it goes from actual conspiracies to maybe this was a conspiracy, maybe not, we have questions, to this is kind of crazy stuff, but who knows, flying saucers, for example, to actual science denial, conspiracy theories that actually serve to promote the interests of a particular industry or wealthy individuals, to the totally crazy stuff, the flat earth, the reptilian overlords and all that kind of thing, conspiracy theories that can do tremendous damage. And, one of those being one of the conspiracy theories that, brought two Republicans into Congress this year. So anyhow, I lay the whole thing out with a new video for our supporters over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Will in Houston, Texas. Hey, Will, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Hi, Tom. How are you? I love your show. You're the most informative host on the air that I know of. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. It seems to me that whenever the Democrats command some type of power by elector mandate or whatever the case may be, they seem to be the weaker of the two parties, even though I think that they often want to pass legislation for the people as opposed to the Republicans who seem to be pro-corporation. But specifically, I remember when Obama came into office, McConnell made it very clear that he wasn't there to legislate. He was there to make sure that Obama was a one-term president. And there were also senators and congressmen that met prematurely before Obama even came into office that plotted to vote against anything that he ever put before them. And it's just disgusting to me.
That's right, in the caucus room restaurant.
Now that the Democrats command some type of power, even though I guess they have the majority with Vice President Harris, but I don't see why. And I understood what you said about this filibustering was part of the House rules, but if they have some type of majority, why can't they get rid of that? Because that's what the Republicans are going to use to block anything that Joe Biden wants to put forward for the people. It seems like it'll be a repeat of the Obama years all over again.
You're absolutely right, Will, and that's why I brought this issue up today. It's why I wrote this op-ed about it over at Medium.com. It's why I'm ranting about it on the radio, because as long as the filibuster stands, Mitch McConnell has enormous power. You take away the filibuster, you have stripped Mitch McConnell of his power. It's that simple. And maybe Chuck Schumer knows some way to emasculate, to weaken the filibuster that I'm not familiar with. And if so, I hope he rolls it out quickly. But, it seems like the straightforward way to do it is to simply change the Senate rules and say, that filibuster thing that John C. Calhoun put into law in the end of the 1830s, early 1840s, that was used to filibuster slavery or anti-slavery legislation, and then was used for over 100 years to filibuster anti-civil rights legislation. We're just going to do away with that. We don't need that anymore. Those things are god-awful relics of a terrible past that was inhumane, and those institutions are as anachronistic as that time. So, Will, I'm totally with you. Will, thanks for the call. Linda in Piedmont, Missouri. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I got two questions. On this filibuster, don't Manchin and Sinema realize that all it is McConnell wanting to sit on his butt and not do nothing?
Yeah, I think they do. But see, there's areas where they want to sit on their butts and not do anything. Kyrsten Sinema does not want to heavily regulate the insurance and banking industries, as far as I can tell. And Joe Manchin wants to make sure that the oil and gas industries and coal industries, continue to get away with murder, sadly.
That's because they got stock. Okay. And
well,
also,
no, it's because those are the industries that are helping pay for their election.
Oh, well, also, do the Republicans actually believe that if any of those people that went into the Capitol building caught them, would ask him, are you Republican or Democrat, before they killed him?
I think there are a lot of Republicans who think that they could, if they were cornered by the mob, they could simply pull out their ID and say, I'm Will Hurd, or not Will Hurd, a bad example, but, I am a Republican, here's my proof. And they would be, let go.
I think.
Yeah, exactly. Sadly, but I think that some of them think that they're immune to this. It's really sad. Linda, thank you for the call. Jack in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Jack, what's up?
Hey, yes. I'm wondering, the filibuster, my mind still hasn't completely been made up. I do understand the origin and, how it could be used against like a side if you're not for that side. But like, what happens? How do you prevent what de Tocqueville called the tyranny of the majority?
Well, de Tocqueville was a royalist. When he came to the United States in 1836 and wrote Democracy in America, he lays out in the opening chapter of the book, in fact, that he's trying to prove that America needs a little more royalty. And in one of the closing chapters, I actually quoted it at some length in my book on equal protection, he talks about how, if the press in America ever fails, we're going to need a king because, democracy is going to fall apart. He was impressed by it, but he was impressed by the level of education. The so-called tyranny of the majority is the argument that has always been made by royalists, by people who think that you can't really trust the mob because the inherent nature of people is greedy and evil, and people will simply vote themselves the public purse, et cetera, et cetera. All those arguments have been well and long disproved, and democracy actually does work, and it works very well in those countries where it's practiced aggressively, like Northern Europe. But so the whole tyranny of the majority thing is not something that I'm concerned about. And de Tocqueville's been dead for almost 150 years. So, Jack, thanks for the call. It was a very thoughtful question, Jack. I really appreciate it. It's not a lot of people who call this show and want to debate Alexis de Tocqueville with me. But I've got an 1842 edition of his book right here on one of these bookshelves. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignan-Nondy Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City. Dangers of it from tyranny of the majority.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding. Dr. Feigl-Ding was the guy who back in January 20th, as I recall, of last year, in a long Twitter thread said, look out, it's coming, a thermonuclear pandemic. He is an epidemiologist and health economist. He's an adjunct senior fellow at the American Federation of Scientists, FAS.org. His website, Dr. D-R-E-R-I-C-D-I-N-G, excuse me, his Twitter handle. I follow him on Twitter. He's just always got really, really great stuff. And Dr. Feigl-Ding, welcome back to the program. It's great having you with us. Where are we at right now with the coronavirus in general here in the United States?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be back. Well, in the U.S., we're past several sobering milestones. 20 million cases and 400,000 deaths. And ICU still very, very full across the country. We've basically have lived through the third peak, third wave, however you want to call it. And we're not over because vaccines are coming. They're rolling out, but they're rolling out very slowly. And just to put it into perspective, we're vaccinating about 1 million a day. But consider that there's 330 million people in America, and each person probably needs 2 doses for most of the vaccines. That would mean 660 days to vaccinate every American at the 1 million a day. And that is just way too slow. If we want to reopen our country in terms of many things, we got to ramp that up in so many ways. And people also need to stop fighting, vaccine hesitancy as well. So we're still in the thick of this, and mortality is still going to soar, and we're going to easily hit 500,000 dead within next month or so. So we're still in some deep trouble right now.
Yeah. I caught a news story, and again, this is just from the news, so I don't, it's not from a scientific source, but apparently one of the countries that has been most efficient at distributing vaccine to their population has been Israel, and that they've gotten such some in the neighborhood of 30+% of the population has gotten their first shot, and as a result, they're starting to see a rapid collapse in the number of new cases. Can you verify that? And what does that tell us? If that's the case, what does that tell us about what the American experience might be if we can get our act together?
Right. Israel has been leading the world in vaccinations. They're vaccinating about at a pace that is 10 times faster than most other countries on a per capita basis. So they've already done well over a quarter. They're approaching a third of their entire population having received at least one shot. So they're already seeing cases drop because of it. It's a good sign. And but at the same time, they're also seeing the new variant, the British more contagious variant, B.1.1.7 variant of the coronavirus. And that variant is a troublemaker because not only is it more 40 to 80% more infectious, around 60% more infectious, it's also possibly also deadlier. And I want to point out that infection, even if it wasn't more deadly in itself, which this one might be, it could spread to more people and actually kill more just by the pure contagious nature of it, because we can find more vulnerable people. And right now, UK is completely slammed by it. Many European countries seeing it. And the U.S., we're seeing it in a dozen states, the new variant. And it's likely, CDC says, that the new variant will overtake the country and become this new contagious variant dominant by March. So we have a big race right now.
Right. I understand that the new variant is, much more contagious. I don't understand exactly why. I've read some pieces suggesting that people expel more virus, other pieces that the spikes are more sticky, more Velcro-like in terms of, attaching to human cells, and therefore it takes fewer viruses being exposed to produce the same kind of infection. What is the mechanism for that increased transmissibility? And is that the sort of thing that could be handled. I saw this piece in the Washington Post a couple of days ago that said it looks like normal procedures to control the virus are ineffective. Does that mean that we need a double mask? There was one story about how people in different hotel rooms in a hotel, but all on the same floor, sharing the same air system, were getting this new variant, whereas with the old virus, it was largely confined to individual rooms because of the air filters, I guess, were catching it or whatever. What do we know about this?
Right. So what you heard is generally correct. What happens is that the spike protein, by the way, of any of these coronaviruses, they latch onto a human receptor, basically like a locking key called an ACE2. And the smoother and tighter it binds the receptor, the more efficiently and faster it enters and invades your cell. Basically, you bind this receptor, and voila, access is granted into human cells and infection succeeds. And so the spike protein seems to be better for the mutated virus to be even faster at doing that, which means they can infect faster with a lower dose and replicate more and more and more. And this is why the viral load is higher and why also you will also expel more viruses as well. And altogether, it doesn't mean that the traditional methods don't work. It just means they don't work as well, and you have to be extra vigilant. And so the new movement right now is, first of all, a lot of people don't wear cloth masks. And cloth masks are this communal thing where if 95% of the people wear them, my mask protects you, your mask protects me. But if half the people don't mask, then that doesn't really help you because it doesn't protect you from inhaling viruses that much. So the new movement is to switch to premium masks. By premium mask, I mean at minimum a surgical mask, but preferably a KN95, Korean KF94. Europeans call it an FFP2. Now, the regular N95 that hospitals use are still very rare and in short supply, and so oftentimes we say save those for the doctors. But there are N95s for like woodworking, which are almost as good, but they don't have the fluid splash protection. But altogether, we need to use these premium masks, these KN95 grade masks, because it really gives you the extra filtration of personal protection as opposed to mutual protection that the cloth masks have. So either double mask, but preferably use these premium masks. And that's what you really need to do. And that's why the mask mandates, we have to be much more aggressive. Hence Biden administration put in the mask mandates in federal buildings, as well as public transit. And we need to do this everywhere. And in many other countries, in Germany, Austria, and France, they now recommend or mandate it for any store, any shop, any grocery store you go into, that you can't just use regular masks anymore. You have to use one of these premium masks. So there's still some shortages, but that's why it's so more important than ever.
We just have 45 seconds before we're going to hit a hard break that I can't stop. What would you do if you were running this response to the pandemic right now?
What I would do is obviously vaccine rollout. We have to do like wartime mobilization with National Guard and FEMA. And in terms of masking, we really have to mandate it everywhere. We need to whip the states who are not willing to mandate it with carrots and sticks to make sure they mandate it. Because if we do it together, we can save so many lives, 50, 100,000 lives before this thing's all over. Because it really is a race so that we can get our schools back open again.
And our economy back together and our lives back to normal.
Yes.
Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, you are doing such great work, and I so appreciate what you're doing on Twitter. Thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you. Take care.
It's great speaking with you. His Twitter handle is Dr. as in Dr. Eric, ERICDING. And strongly encourage you to follow Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour. More of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Michael in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Yes, I was calling in regards to the filibuster. It just if they don't get rid of it or get it under control, it just seems to lend credence to Noam Chomsky's statement that the corporate party owns the United States, which has two factions, Democrat and Republican. They basically implement variations of the same policies. That's can be also seen with the situation given Medicare for all.
I'm sorry. Start again. I missed something there. I must have missed some predicate.
Yes, about the filibuster, Noam Chomsky is saying that the United States has one party, the business party. It has two factions, Democrats and Republicans. The filibuster's in place to give cover for both political parties. So
I don't disagree, Michael. It's not Republicans I'm calling out here today. It's two Democrats.
Correct. And that's the problem is the corporate party. It has two factions.
Yeah.
So
No, I don't disagree. I mean, and the solution is to run candidates who are not beholden to corporations. I'm with you. Frank in Portland. Hey, Frank, what's up?
Hey, been a long-time listener to Air America Days, first-time calling. Just want to share with your audience that I just got the vaccine. I'm a educator here in Portland, and so we were put first. And I encourage people to go out and get it. It didn't hurt one bit, and I feel great. It's been about an hour since I had it, so I just want to pass that on.
Great. Two of my kids are healthcare workers, and they've both had the shot, and both of them said that, after 4 or 5 hours and for the next 24 hours, their arms were real sore. But, hey, that's a small price to pay to not die or not be, debilitated. Yeah.
Yeah. Get your listeners out there to get it. We need to get going on this.
Yeah, if they can. I mean, this is the problem. I mean, when Governor Brown, your governor and mine, came out and said, "Okay, we're gonna lower the age, we're gonna open the doors, we're gonna get a lot," and because this was when Trump was still president, because Alex Azar had come out and said, "We're gonna release the stockpile," and so Kate Brown, our governor, is like, "Cool, we're gonna start administering shots like there's no tomorrow." And so then she says to the federal government, and how many shots are you going to send us? And they're like, turns out we don't have any. We were just lying. So, I was supposed to be eligible on January 26th, I think, which is today. Now they're saying it's going to be, February for people who are 65 plus. We'll see. We'll see. But in the meantime, I'm keeping my head down and keeping my mask up.
So I'm going to do the same for quite a bit longer, obviously. But you take care and best of health.
Yeah. Thank you, Frank. Thanks. And good on you, not just for getting a shot and for calling in. I appreciate that. But for being an educator. I mean, that's the front lines of democracy. It's the front lines of the future. What you're doing for a living. There are few higher callings than being an educator. It's a noble profession, a noble, what would you call it, vocation and avocation. So thank you, Frank. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a minute. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. I will be back in 1 minute. Stick around. On the Science Revolution, Dr. Justin A. Frank is here on the psychology of mob mentality and violence. What propels a mob? Dr. Sam Metz, a member of Mad as Hell Doctors, drops by on the need for federal legislation to allow individual states to create true statewide universal health care plans, especially single-payer plans. Plus, in Geeky Science, I've discovered how 11 minutes can save the quality of your life. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. John in Palatine, Illinois. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm great, but I'll get better. John, how about you?
Well, I'm okay. I wanted to talk to you about the filibuster, and I think we need to do a two-pronged approach here. The first prong, I would say, is to bring back like the CARES Act and do something with the COVID relief and have Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema go on there and reintroduce the CARES Act to the Senate, and then use some of Donald Trump's words about the $600 being an insult to the American people and all the other things that he said. Okay, and then we'll let that bill go to a vote. And when the Republicans, because we know they're not going to go for it, right? When they refuse that bill, then we can have Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema go back and say, well, look, we tried everything we could. The American people need relief from this COVID. We need the money to get the shots into people's arms and the distribution. And you know, the people are losing their faith because they can't provide for their basic needs. And the Republicans keep holding it up here and there. We have no choice but to get rid of the filibuster, because all these people are going to die if we don't. And I think
it may come to that, John. I mean, I'm not a big fan of playing chicken with legislation, but it has a long and storied history. And while I'm not a big fan of it, that may be what it's going to take. It may be that a major piece of legislation that is actually going to move America forward in a really consequential way gets laid on the floor of the Senate by brought up by Chuck Schumer. I mean, laid there by whomever. And the Republicans just say, nope, not going to have it. We're not going to have anything to do with it. We're going to filibuster this. That's it. And I can tell you what that piece of legislation is going to be, by the way. It's going to be H.R. 1 or Senate Bill 1, which is election reform. And because the billionaires are already hysterical about this. I mean, just hysterical. If you go over to FreedomWorks website, you'll which is the group that brought us the Tea Party, the Koch network funded group. They are just, in fact, I got to share this with you. This is, if I still have it, I'm pretty sure I do. Oh, come on, where did it go? Here it is, right here. This is the email that I got this morning from FreedomWorks. Knock, knock, knock. You get up from dinner with your family and look through your front window. What you see staring back at you is a government bureaucrat with orders from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to remove that political yard sign from your front yard. You're also slapped with a hefty fine for publicly expressing your political views without first filing the paperwork now required under federal law. But that's not all. Your name and address will now be listed online. So this is what the billionaires are really worried about, making you and your family vulnerable to harassment and intimidation from Antifa and other violent left-wing groups and organizations. Sound far-fetched? Well, Thomas, the nightmare scenario I just described to you could become reality if Democrats succeed in ramming through the misnamed For the Politicians Act, better referred to as the GAG Act, H.R. 1. It was as the very first bill introduced by Democrats in the new Congress, the GAG Act is Nancy Pelosi's top priority for 2021. The GAG Act hands Nancy Pelosi and her henchmen total control of our entire election system by seizing control of every state's election system, mandating expanded vote by mail, changing election day from 1 day to 2 weeks to give left-wing activists plenty of time to bust voters to the polls, and removing voter ID requirements, forcing states to adopt swamp-controlled redistricting commissions, greasing the skids for D.C. statehood. I mean, these are all things that I think are, if you
just imagine the rest.
Recharacterize them, they're quite reasonable. But FreedomWorks is positively hysterical about this, and they go on and on and on, and then they say, this is the type of massive grassroots program needed to stop Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats from making the GAG Act the law of the land, and I'm sure you agree. And so click here to kick in your $250. And then they go on to say they've got 6 million supporters and we're going to stop this. So I am predicting that this is where the filibuster is first going to show up.
Can I say one more thing, Tom? I know you got lots of people on the phone. Yeah. The other thing I want all of us to remember, too, is I agree with you that we need to hold the carrot out to Manchin and Sinema, because remember what happened with Joe Lieberman? I'm afraid that if we go too far and penalizing them, that they're going to switch parties on us. because they can switch
It's possible.
parties at any time.
That's what
correct?
happened. Yeah, that's what in West Virginia. That's what happened with the governor. I think Jim Justice is his name, and he was elected as a Democrat, and he became a Republican. I'm not sure where he's at right now, but and I'm generally more fond of carrots than sticks in any case, but particularly with people on our own side. Yeah, John, excellent point. Thanks a lot for the call. Mike in Chicago. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Well, you could say I'm possibly disagreeing with your thoughts, how I Manchin and Sinema want the filibuster. Because if I understand you correctly,
what's your theory?
You're saying it's their support for their donors, and whether it be banking or coal, all they're doing is hiding. I see it as that they're just hiding their vote from their constituents, because any legislation will most likely fail with just one no vote from a Democratic side. So if this is true, it appears to me that they're trying to hide their no vote on legislation in the areas from their constituents. So and if we assume this is true, we should approach pressure from that direction. Maybe it's call banking their voters and getting them to call their senators or something.
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
I agree. And in fact, what I said earlier is that these guys and these guys in general, senators in the United States Senate, both parties, for a century, have been saying, well, I'm sorry we couldn't pass that bill, but we just couldn't get 60 votes, or we just couldn't get 66 votes, as if they have nothing to do with it. So I'm with you, Mike. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon-Chan Rah. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. Hey, we have a new video for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. It's about curing type 1 diabetes, which is a pretty amazing thing. Type 1 diabetes is where the cells in the pancreas that produce insulin are actually destroyed. They're gone. Type 1 diabetics, typically it shows up in childhood. And without insulin, people die from it fairly young. With insulin, they can live a good long life, but a University of Alberta researcher, Dr. James Shapiro, back in 1990 pioneered a transplant system. Now, the problem with that was that people had to use immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of their lives because they had just gotten, a partial pancreas transplant from another person. But now he's successfully on mice worked out a way of actually curing type 1 diabetes. We can't do it legally here in the United States, but they're doing it in Canada. It's amazing. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. On the line with us is our old buddy Lori Wallach, the Executive Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. TradeWatch.org is the website, or citizen.org/trade. And Lori can be tweeted at PCGTW or Wallach, WALLACH, Lori, LORI. Lori, welcome back. So we're looking at
Buy America thing. I wrote an op-ed about this on Sunday saying, we need to go back to FDR's Buy America program that, ever since Reagan, the presidents have been issuing waivers like jelly beans. And then Biden comes out on Monday and says this is what he's going to do. It blew my mind. Is it as good as it seems?
Well, it's certainly a good first step. The actual executive order doesn't actually fix the problems. It lays out about 60% of the territory they need to cover, and it lays out things they promise to do. So we'll all have to stay on top of the story to make sure that the declaration of intention to do it translates into real change.
Yeah. So you also note that U.S. trade policies starting this really started to go downhill during the Clinton administration, and Bill Clinton gets roundly blamed for it. But actually, NAFTA and the WTO treaties, the GATT treaties, these were negotiated during the Reagan and Bush administrations. And Clinton just brought these policies to fruition, if my understanding is correct. Correct me, please, if I'm wrong. And that disproportionately, minorities are the ones who lost their jobs, principally African American and Hispanic people. I would assume women as well, even though women are the majority, numerically. But that disproportionately minorities were harmed, and not only were they more likely to lose their jobs, but when they do get new jobs, even with the same level of education, they're more likely to have lower pay scales. Do I have all that right?
You do, and that is the finding of our new report that is called Trade Discrimination. And you can see it on our website, which is tradewatch.org. What we decided to do is something that hadn't been done before, which is we wanted to figure out what were the impacts, particularly on workers of color, of these trade agreements. So we took the data that laid out what sectors of the economy were the hardest hit. We found 10 manufacturing sectors that have seen the most job loss, the worst shift in a bigger trade deficit. And we looked in the service sector and different sectors, for instance, call centers. And then we ran the demographic data. And gruesomely, we found out that in 9 of the 10 sectors that were the hardest hit by trade, both Latino and Black workers were disproportionately represented relative to their share of the working population, and that the call center industry, which has had mass, broad outsourcing, largely to the Philippines, where there are no labor rights, has been people of color at an enormously disproportionate percentage. Then we started looking at the states. Certain states have gotten particularly slammed: Texas, New York, California. And we looked at where demographically people of color were living. And the states that were the least impacted are the whitest states. The states that were the heaviest impacted were the states with the most people of color. And then, as you mentioned, we looked at the income inequality data. And we found a larger contribution when rehired to lower wages for people of color losing jobs to trade. But, Tom, maybe the worst thing we found was that actually, regardless of looking at education levels, et cetera, Black and Latino workers had a lesser likelihood of getting rehired at all. And so that's just plain out discrimination. That's not about the trade agreements. That's about racism.
Well, that was my follow-up question, Lori, is to what extent is this a function of basically, LIFO, last in, first out, that minorities have been only in the last few decades had available to them in a really broad way, good paying jobs and careers and things that had historically been blocked, up until the 1960s, blocked by law in many cases from people of color. And so you've got just a couple of generations coming into this, last in. So when it starts falling apart, first out. And would that not be true of any kind of policy that simply caused millions of people to lose their jobs, as these trade policies that Reagan and Bush negotiated did?
That's what we thought at first, and that was sort of the hypothesis we were testing. What we found instead is that actually it was the impact of losing 65,000 manufacturing facilities under these trade agreements in the last 25 years. It was losing 5 million manufacturing jobs. The economy has created a lot of jobs, but as far as jobs of a decent wage, a union job, and in fact, there are a lot more Latinos now working in manufacturing because the Latino share of the population is up. But Latinos who lost the union, middle-class jobs that were outsourced to lower wages when those workers got rehired, they're making a third or a half in non-union jobs now in what is classified as manufacturing, like meat packing, or in the Southeast and some of the non-union auto plants of Honda and other companies. But what we saw basically actually was with black workers, it was the pattern of the Great Migration. And leaving the racial terror of the Jim Crow South, where did people come? To places, Midwestern cities, where there were jobs in auto manufacturing, in electronics manufacturing, and we actually saw that pattern reverse offshored in the 90s and 2000s under the trade agreement, so that it wasn't just last in, first out, but the entire plants are gone. Not like they fired the most recent hires. There are over 3.5 million jobs certified just since NAFTA as lost trade. The whole plant is gone. The entire community in Cleveland and Milwaukee and Detroit and Flint, places people came up from down south to escape poverty but racial terror, there are no more of those middle-class industrial jobs. It's all gone.
So when advocating to bring manufacturing back to this country, historically I've made two arguments. The first is that manufacturing creates wealth. This was Adam Smith's argument. And that wealth stays where the manufacturing happens. Even when the product is sold overseas, you get money for it. So basically you're making wealth. And the second argument, of course, is that it produces good-paying jobs. But now we've got right-wing think tanks that are telling us, well, yeah, you may want these manufacturing jobs back, but, a factory that used to make cars with, 30 workers per car or something, or per 1,000 cars, now does it with 3 workers because of robots. And those workers, by the way, no longer have unions because we passed all these so-called right-to-work laws. And so instead of making $40 an hour, they're now making $12.50 an hour. So what's the big deal? Why are you so exorcised about trade?
So I am happy to say, having heard those lines, we actually wrote a paper taking that malarkey entirely down. Number one, investment in automation has been at the lowest level in the last 25 years in manufacturing, in the 80 years of data being kept. Number two, this notion that there's a huge productivity boost in manufacturing. If you break out the sectors, as Sue Helper, a professor at the Upjohn Institute who did this research, found out, it's only in computers, and it's an accounting fallacy because they changed the efficiency for faster, speedier computers. Actually, a data error is behind this notion of huge efficiency gains in manufacturing. The investment has not been there in automation. Tom, the one big change is we went from a virtual trade balance to an enormous deficit. We outsourced that production. And when and if real Buy America changes happen so that there's an incentive to invest in manufacturing in the U.S., because if it's not made here, there isn't someone to buy it in the government, then we're going to see jobs coming back and investment coming back, not in all the old stuff necessarily, but in all the cutting-edge investment of the future, in electric cars, in the high-tech batteries, in new materials, which will be the lighter and more resilient materials. That Buy America order, if we make it happen, is what that's about.
That's great. Lori Wallach, it is always so informative talking with you. I really appreciate the great work you're doing as the executive director of TradeWatch.org. Lori, thanks again for dropping by today.
Thank you.
Great talking with you, as always. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Speaking the truth to multinational corporations that want to ship your job overseas, would really rather you didn't know all about. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's see. Indigo in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Indigo, what's up?
Hey, how are you? Yeah, so what I'm wanting to ask you about, I know this is a bold policy, but what do you think of the idea of abolishing the United States Senate? I guess I'm just asking because of the frustration I'm feeling with the filibuster and all, and I know the late John Dingell did propose it.
Yeah. Oh, he wasn't the first. The United States Senate has been problematic from the founding of the Republic, but it was necessary to bring in some of the smaller states. I would not be opposed to that, to our having a single parliament, basically what is it called, unipolar? Oh, there's a word for it anyway. In political science. For unicameral. Thank you. Yeah. Bless you. Yeah. I would not be opposed to that, or I would not be opposed to keeping the Senate, but reapportioning it. Basing Senate representation on population, but just have a much larger population base for each senator. So if you were to say, okay, let's use as a threshold Wyoming. Wyoming has just a little short of 1 million people. They get one senator. So any state that has 2 million people gets 2 senators, 3 million people, 3 senators, all the way up to California with, 30 million people, 30 senators, or some variation thereof. But, right now, the problem that we're facing is that Democrats in the United States Senate represent 41 million more Americans than do Republicans, and yet the power is 50-50, and that's crazy. And the changes that you're talking about, Indigo, would require a major constitutional amendments, which I think are not going to happen. But a shorter path to the same goal, which is more Democratic representation in the United States Senate, is D.C. statehood and Puerto Rican statehood. If we were to do that, then we would have 4 presumably Democratic senators, and I think that would be a good thing. And I know that that's on the agenda. I know that at least D.C. statehood for sure is on Chuck Schumer's agenda. So, step by step, we got to get there. I got to move along. Indigo, thank you for the call. Will in Lee Summit, Missouri. Hey, Will, what's up?
Hi, yeah, Tom, I really appreciate your historical perspective. I wanted to get you to unpack Josh Hawley's position that the states, primarily he did Pennsylvania that night, about the states violating the U.S. Constitution, even though the state governors, the Secretary of the State, the Supreme Court voted for the electors. He seems to think that they were in violation of the U.S. Constitution because only the state legislatures have the right to change election laws, and that's what his position is. Can you unpack that for me?
Yeah. The state legislatures do have the power to change election laws. That's right. It's in the Constitution. But that said, it's just like the federal government says, okay, we're going to create the Environmental Protection Agency. Now you guys go out and figure out how to clean up the air. Then it's up to the EPA to figure out exactly what the policies are to clean up the air. The state legislature in Pennsylvania said, okay, we're going to have elections in Pennsylvania, and here's the broad guidelines. Now, the governor, the individual secretary, the secretary of state, the individual county officials, they implement the policy, and they can make tweaks and changes on it. So Hawley is taking a constitutional truth and basically turning it inside out. There was nothing unconstitutional done in Pennsylvania, and it's a BS argument. So that's my answer. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. There's been a debate going on for 40 years about whether Reagan's, what George Herbert Walker Bush during the primaries in 1980 called voodoo economics, trickle-down economics, Reaganomics, whether it works or not. Does it work to stimulate the economy and help the lot of the average working person to cut taxes on rich people, like Donald Trump did, in 2017. $1.5 trillion tax cut for the rich. Does that help the economy? Well, the London School of Economics, the most prestigious economics institution in the world, just did the most comprehensive study on this, including 20 OECD nations, 20 of the richest nations in the world, including the United States and the United Kingdom, which is where this insanity began back in the early 1980s with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And the results are shocking. We lay the whole thing out in a new video that's over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Hey, I want to say I agree with that last caller about getting rid of the Senate. It's useless as the Electoral College. And, it's nothing more than a handmaiden for the president, and it controls the judiciary as well. But what I was going to suggest is that if they have to have the filibuster, limit it to 1 or 2 per year or per session, whatever it is, and they got to choose. And that way you preserve it, but in a limited way. What do you think?
Yeah. I'm guessing that what Chuck Schumer is going to do is some variation of that each senator can call one filibuster, or there's a certain number of filibusters that can be used a year, or the filibuster only lasts for a certain period of time, and eventually the bill has to come up for consideration, or there has to be a vote, or it can only last while the senator is standing and speaking. There's a whole lot of ways to tweak it. The question is whether any of those tweaks will get past Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And I don't know the answer to that question. I'm guessing Chuck Schumer knows a lot better than me, we've got to get there. So thanks a lot for the call, Bill. Great. I'm sorry. There's a slight delay here, and it sounded like you were going to say something. I missed that. I'm sorry. Shelley in Clarkston, Michigan. Hey, Shelley, what's on your mind?
Hey, I was just calling in wondering about your thoughts on direct democracy.
Like the Greeks had, you mean, where basically everybody votes on everything? Actually, the Greeks even ultimately, maybe it was the Spartans. The Greeks ultimately had 6,001. They did it by lottery, so even that was a representative democracy. What type of direct democracy? Is this an abstract question, or is there something you had in mind, Shelley?
I was more referencing Mike Gravel's legislation, the Citizens Amendment to the Constitution of the United States and the Citizens Legislative Procedure Act.
This was the, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm not a big Mike Gravel fan, so I don't know all the details, but my recollection is that he was proposing that at the federal level, we do what about half the states have right now, which is where citizens can come up with a citizens initiative, can basically write a law, and if you can get the majority of the citizens to vote for that law, it becomes law. Is that what you're talking about?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, okay. Here's the problem with that. And I saw this, I've seen it played out here in Oregon. I think probably the best example is what I saw happen in Washington State, because here in Portland, we're right up against the border of Washington State, and Vancouver, Washington is just on the other side of the river. So on our television, our local television, we get Washington advertisements. And Jay Inslee had proposed, although it actually came out of a citizens group like this, because Washington State has that ability of citizens to propose legislation, a law that would have put a tax on carbon and would have cycled that carbon money back down to average people to minimize the impact of the tax on people who commute a lot and things like that. It was a relatively uncontroversial bill. Obviously the fossil fuel industry didn't like it, but it was very popular when it was put on the ballot. They got plenty of signatures to put on the ballot. The early polling showed that it was going to pass easily. And then we were watching the TV here. This is popping up on normal TV shows. And here comes this guy who looks like Mr. Rogers, He was the former either Attorney General or Secretary of State. I think he was a former Secretary of State of Washington State back when it had a Republican administration. Very nice, soft-spoken guy. And he comes on and it says, former Secretary of State Joe Blow. And he says, we all understand that Jay Inslee and the Democrats want to do something to clean up the environment, and we all support that idea. But this particular ballot initiative is going to cause absolute chaos in Washington state. It's going to wipe out people's jobs. It's going to raise your taxes. It's going to actually increase he just went through all this stuff that was all lies. I mean, just lying through his teeth, right? And what happened was they carpet bombed us with it. You couldn't watch television here in Portland for more than 30 minutes on any particular day for about a 4-week period leading up to that election without seeing that ad over and over and over again. And sure enough, that thing went down in defeat. So as long as big money has the ability to influence elections with lies ratified by the Supreme Court and, saying, well, that's just free speech, direct democracy is going to have a real challenge, as it is in states all over the country right now, Shelley. I mean, we saw the same thing with that measure in California to force Uber to deal with their people as if they were employees. Uber dropped, $30-40 million into that campaign, maybe more than that, and defeated it. And now you've got companies all over the country that are laying off their employee truck drivers, for example, and saying, hey, you want to become a contract worker? So, we've got some problems with democracy in general that we've got to fix. And until we fix the money in politics problem, which is one of the things that H.R. 1 and Senate Bill 1 will address, until we do that, we can't do a whole lot of other things. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow. Congressman Pocan will be with us the first hour. And in the meantime, get out there, get active, tag You're It. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.